Ollie, great meeting you. I feel like I'm somewhat newer to your work, which is kind of exciting because every time I watch a video, you recommend another one, and then I'm like, I gotta watch that. I gotta check it out.
Nice.
Like it's all new to me. And the one that really struck a chord with me initially was the James Clear Atomic Habits video because I'll be honest, I bought the book and I just couldn't get through it. And I figured I should get the Audible. It'll be easier. It was like a little easier. And then when I watched your video, I thought, okay, like now I get it. And I think to me, your magic is being able to take the the distilling the message and then the video sort of creation that you do and then molding it all together. It's just really compelling. And I think that's like your superpower. So thanks for putting those types of videos together.
Oh, thank you so much. It really means a lot that you would watch the stuff, discover it. You'd be keen to do this podcast. The way I do the videos is I treat them as kind of notes to myself. And so when I'm doing a book summary video about a book, it's usually because I've read the book, I thought this was really good, and I don't want to forget it. And so if I make a video about it where I'm forced to go through and distill and think, what's actually how do you actually distill Atomic Habits into a 12-minute long video? That really helps to stick in my own brain. So it's a selfish act more than anything else, but I'm glad other people find it helpful as well.
Okay, so I can talk about this for an hour, but you talked about Seven Habits in one of your recent videos, right? So the book that you thought was mainstream, it was I identified with that because someone gave it to me and it sat on my shelf, not this shelf, but where I lived for 10 years. I hadn't read it, and somewhere in that book, Stephen Covey says, "Read." I don't know if you remember this, but he says like, "Read as if you were going to teach." And so
Mm.
when you describe that, that's what I think about. I think of Seven Habits. I also haven't read Sapiens, but we can talk about that later.
That's really good on Audible. I tried so hard to read it on normal book format, and then I got through it on Audible, and I was like, oh, this is actually a really cool story. So
I'm definitely gonna check that out. So I'd love to just sort of rewind, because I think one of the interesting things about you is you have two careers that are really hard to sort of make it a full-time job in. Being a doctor is hard enough, you know, being a creator full-time. Um, we can talk about like luck, hard work, and all that stuff, but it's not easy, right? It's equally difficult. And to make the transition while you're a doctor is tough. So I'd love to just rewind and understand what did your parents do for a living and how did that impact some of your career choices along the way?
yeah, great question. So my mum is a doctor. She's a single parent, and I was born in Pakistan, and then at the age of like 2, we moved to Lesotho, which is a country in southern Africa. And so my mum moved with me, my brother, and my grandma. So it was the four of us. We were the family, and my mum was working as a doctor in Africa and doing all sorts of things there. But after a few years of being there, like 5, 6 years of being in Africa, my mum decided to move us to the UK because of education. She always highly valued education and wanted us to have a great education. And so she made the move all the way to the UK, took the exams, did everything, and started working as a doctor in the UK. We joined her about a year into that journey after she had taken her exams and gotten a job and everything. And the core underlying theme through a lot of my childhood was the importance of education. And so I, it wasn't like I was being sort of hammered with a stick and told I must get an education. It was like that she clearly did a great job because I wanted to learn more things and I wanted to understand. Very quickly, I realized I enjoyed teaching kids in my class who were asking me for help, and I really wanted to do well academically. So that was like a core kind of motivator of my life in the early days. But I wanted to do well academically. But on the side, when I was around 11, 12-ish, I discovered a passion for web design and web development. And I realized, ooh, this internet stuff seems really cool. And the day I realized you could make money on the internet, that was when my mind sort of split in two, because it was like half of my brain is focused on how do I would do well academically, because I thought, I'd like to be a doctor. I'd like to go to a fancy university. That seems cool. But the other half of my brain was like, how do I make money on the internet? How do I hustle? Like, what are all these, like, what is marketing? What is all this stuff? I've been on Russell Brunson's email list since the age of 13, if you're familiar with his stuff. I've been on Neil Patel's email list since the age of 13. And now I'm chatting to some of these guys on Twitter and meeting them in real life 16 years later. So it's pretty cool. But like I had this dual life where half of me was like focused on academics and the other half was focused on how the hell do I make money on the internet.
Oh my goodness. You mentioned your mom moving and still being a doctor. Like I've just heard how difficult it is to do it in different countries because I imagine there's like so many tests and things you've got to retake. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, she's an absolute trooper. I don't know how she did it. because
What
she's
would you
like moving around different countries with like two kids and an elderly grandma and trying to do all the exams and trying to support the family and also working full time. It's yeah, mental.
Amazing. What would you say is maybe one or two of the most important lessons from your parents? I know you don't have kids yet, but what's one that comes to mind maybe that you'd want to carry with you? Or maybe you have kids and I have no idea.
I do not yet have kids. These are some deep questions. One of the big things my mom's always been about is modeling behavior rather than preaching behavior. So my mom's always been very generous and, always generous in terms of picking people up from the airport and inviting people over to our house and like cooking for people. And anytime we'd have guests, as I imagine it's similar in your family, it's sort of like food is like a big thing. So she'll cook like a ridiculous meal that's like way too much, but she'll always be worried that like it's not enough food. And so that like spirit of generosity, I've definitely taken forward in my life. And, what they say, the secret to living is giving or something like that. And so
Yeah, no.
that's a message I'm trying to continue to like remember because it's so easy to forget that when we get into the, focusing on the self, focusing on like the, how do I succeed? And it's easy to forget, at least for me, that actually, there's so much value and passion in service rather than in kind of focusing on the self.
I love that. So I have an early copy of your book, and one of the things I noticed, the acknowledgments pages were blank because it's an early copy, and I actually like to start there if that's okay with you.
Of course, yeah.
Who would you say is sort of the unsung hero? Like this book wouldn't be possible without this sort of one person. Who comes to mind and why?
There are definitely a lot of people. I think the okay, I'll give you two. One would be like obviously there's my mom because it wouldn't be possible without her, but there's also my grandma. So my grandma was actually a primary school teacher, and she kind of quit her job and retired to move to a different country with me and my brother and my mom to essentially raise us because my mom was always working full time. So my grandma was the one who was like doing like helping us out with like our English and our maths and teaching us multiplications and things like that because she was a teacher. And so she was the one who really in my early childhood days kind of helped me get into this whole like, hey, education is fun, education is interesting, learning is fun, learning is interesting. And so the whole 3-year journey of writing the book, I think, was tapping into some of that around like, hey, it's actually really cool that I get to learn all this cool stuff about productivity. I get to research all these scientific papers, and I get to share it in a way that's in a way that's hopefully accessible to people. So my grandma would be one of them. Another one would be a woman called Rachel Jepson, who was one of our editors, and she was amazing. Like we brought her on about 2 years into the process, and I was kind of floundering. I didn't really know what I was doing, and Rachel just sort of came in and project managed the whole thing. Where, even though I'm a productivity expert, I still struggle with like deadlines and procrastination and things. And so she was the one who was like, okay, Ollie, this week we're going to write these next 4 chapters or this next chapter, and you're going to send me the pages and I'll give you feedback. And just having that accountability. I think a lot of times when it comes to trying to get things done, a lot of us try and just do it ourselves. Whereas actually tapping into the power of someone else, the power of people to help us along our journey, an accountability buddy or something like that, someone to hold you, someone to make you feel a little bit guilty when you're not doing the work, but not guilty in like a mean way, guilty in like, I really want to do this thing. And so I'm enlisting this person to help. Rachel was super helpful in that whole journey.
That's amazing. And even about your grandma, like making learning fun. My wife always talks about that. She's been teaching our kids. And one of her biggest concerns is like, if it's not fun, that's a concern. And so it's cool to also hear about your grandma being a teacher.
Yeah, I think there's something really powerful about it. If it's not fun, that's a concern. That's kind of the whole thesis of the book, is why it's called Feel Good Productivity. Because I think a lot of people have this attitude of like, oh, work is a drag, work is a bit of a grind, like you got to discipline yourself. And it's like, okay, sure, you can discipline yourself to get started with the thing. I'm going to go gym today. I'm going to need a small dose of discipline to get there. But once you're there, it's like you can't sustain a habit for the long term through discipline, because that's just a miserable existence. Why would you want to just try and force yourself to do a thing that you know is good for you just because you know it's good for you? It's so much nicer and so much easier and so much more rewarding and so much better for your productivity and your creativity and your stress levels to find a way to make the process fun, to make it enjoyable, so that the enjoyment and the energy is what sustains the process, but maybe a dose of discipline is what's needed to get started.
I think you had that quote in there, like discipline equals freedom. It's the It's sort of that Instagram quote that a lot of people see. And yeah, it definitely a lot of the things that you were saying in the book, like I kind of just sort of nod my head. Well, let me ask you this though. Like when you think about the inflection point for you from being a doctor to being a creator, what was that inflection point really like? I also had the question like, how'd you make the decision? Did your family think you were crazy? Like, what was that like?
Yeah. So there's been a couple of inflection points along the way. One big inflection point was when I was around 18, I discovered Tim Ferriss's book, The 4 Hour Work Week. And that book completely blew my mind open because it turned me onto this idea of like passive income and the fact that, wait, I don't have to just work and work and work and work and make money and until I retire and then I'll enjoy life. Because I guess the script that I had implicitly picked up in society was that the way you make money is by working really hard at your job, and then you save, and then you put some of those savings into property. You get on the property ladder, and then maybe when you're 65 with osteoarthritis in both of your knees, you'll have 2 or 3 rental properties, which will then allow you to fund your retirement. Like no one ever told me that, but that was just the script that I'd been taught. MJ DeMarco calls this the slow lane path to wealth of like, oh, just work really hard, save a little bit, buy some properties, put it in index funds, all of that stuff, and then life will be good. What Tim Ferriss taught me was that, wait a minute, why, what? Like, why am I trying to live like this? Like, if is the point of life not to enjoy life? And so why would you wait until your retirement where you don't have any health or energy left to do interesting things? Why not have these mini retirements along the way? Why not be able to work from anywhere? Why not be able to spend 4 months in Thailand and work from there if you feel like it? And in 2007, when the book came out, this was a freaking revolutionary idea. Now it's pretty mainstream. But when I read that book at the age of 18, it made me realize, oh shit, like there's this whole world out there that I never knew existed. And that led to me asking, like, I would always meet doctors and I would ask them, hey, if you won the lottery, would you continue to practice medicine? And half of them would say, no, I would leave immediately. And the other half would say, I would continue medicine, but I'd go part-time. Actually, in the first half of people who would leave immediately, one guy even said, I would leave in the middle of the operation if I won the lottery. And like most of the doctors that I knew didn't seem that happy. The ones who worked part-time did. So I was like, okay, there's something here. And so for the ones who, would choose to go to work part-time, maybe 3 days a week, I asked them, well, what's stopping you from going part-time? And the answer would always be about money. I've got kids to support. I've got a family to support. I've got a mortgage. The kids are in private school, whatever the thing might be. Doctors in the UK don't earn very much. So it sort of caps out at about 100K once you're a fully qualified consultant. And so I kind of realized that, wait a minute, like the people who are, I am on this career path to be a doctor. The people who are 10 years ahead of me are not enjoying their lives. Half of them want to just leave medicine completely. The other half would go part-time. And the only thing stopping them is money. Cool. That's interesting. That means solving that equation, what I need is money. And what I need is money from stuff on the side so that if I continue to do medicine, then I will do it for fun rather than for profit and rather than because I have to. I'd want to do medicine because I get to do it rather than because I have to do it. And so that was the core inflection point that made me realize, cool, I need to build a business. And that decision to build a business when I was like 18 fundamentally changed the trajectory of my life because it helped me do all of this stuff. It's why I'm sitting here. It's why I wrote a book. It's why I was ultimately able to quit my day job as a doctor because I decided to build streams of passive income on the side.
When did you decide that you can actually make the switch? And did anyone call you crazy?
Yeah.
Like the real switch. Like I'm putting in my notice, I'm out. And
yeah. So the nice thing about medicine in the UK is that after 2 years of working full time, there's a very natural career break where you then kind of, it's not like a conveyor belt. You then have to reapply and decide what specialty or what residency program you want to go into. And so I always kind of knew that like, okay, after I've done my first 2 years, I do want to take a break and I want to go to Australia to try out some emergency medicine or do some research in a lab. A lot of people will take time out to do stuff like that. So I always knew that was the break I wanted to take. It just so happened that break was in August 2020, which was slap bang in the middle of the pandemic. I was in the process of going to Australia to do emergency medicine, but they closed their borders. And so completely by accident, I ended up being a full-time YouTuber in the middle of the pandemic where everyone's YouTube channel was taking off because it was the middle of the pandemic and everyone was on YouTube. And so I remember thinking, okay, cool. I'm kind of bored at home. I'll just make some more YouTube videos. I'll make an online course. And immediately, like that, within a few months, our business had made like an extra $1 million. And that's like more money than I'd ever seen in my life by an absolute mile. Like that's 20 years worth of the salary that I was on as a doctor. And we sort of made that in the space of about 3 or 4 months by releasing an online course. And even then I was still like, no, this is my path. I'm just taking a 1 year break from medicine. This is my path, etc., etc. And it was pretty random. But about a year later, I happened to be interviewed on a podcast called School of Greatness by a guy who's now become a friend, Lewis Howes. And I said to him that, yeah, man, I really want to work in medicine part-time and want to do YouTube on the side. And he was like, wait a minute, why do you want to work in medicine part-time? And I was like, oh, because I don't know. I mean, I think it'll be fun, and I think it'll be able to help people, and it'll be good for the brand because then I can continue to call myself a doctor. And he was like,
it felt like your identity.
Yeah, it felt like my identity. And so he really challenged me on that. And like, I met someone the other day who's listened to that interview, and they were like, oh my God, like that inflection point where he challenged you on this identity that you were clinging onto was so like groundbreaking. Because I think this isn't just about like me being a doctor and then being a YouTuber. Like, we all have an identity that we have created for ourselves, or that, our conditioning or our background has created for us. And the strongest force in human personality is the need to stay consistent with the identity that we have. And that is a force that's stronger than literally anything else. And I felt that force so much. I was like, I couldn't possibly not be a doctor. But what it took was, someone with a good heart who was challenging me on it in a nice way, sort of coaching me through the process for me to realize, oh, hang on. Actually, if I could design whatever life I wanted, it would not include going to a hospital, because I always enjoyed teaching more than I enjoyed practicing medicine. I'd want to be a teacher. I'd want to make videos. I'd want to do podcasts. I want to write books. I'd want to do talks. I'd want to do lectures, but I wouldn't want to work in a hospital. And that was the key decision point. And so I'm still very grateful to Lewis Howes for
wow
for being that kind of guidance and that coach for me.
I love that. I appreciate you sharing that. There was this quote that I heard, that all research is me search. And when I was thinking about your book, I was wondering, how true did that ring for you? Is this book sort of you trying to figure things out as well? And is it sort of autobiographical?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've not come across that quote before, but that's very cool. That is very cool indeed. All research is me search. Yeah. So the way the book came about is because I had a problem with my own productivity, in that when I was in medical school, I found ways to make things fun, but I also kind of worked pretty hard, and I was able to do that. Like, I was just able to just work harder. I needed to pull an all-nighter to do an essay or whatever. It's just like, it wasn't that hard. But when I started working full time, as you'll know, probably you've had a full-time job and our listeners might do as well. When you work full time, suddenly it's, students are like, oh my God, I'm so busy. I was like, just wait until you freaking get a job, man. Then you'll see how busy you are. And so I was working like 40, 60 hours a week as a doctor. And on the side, I was trying to grow my YouTube channel, and I was trying to take care of my health, and I was trying to kind of see some friends. And it just felt like such a grind, and working harder did not actually solve anything. And so there's a phrase in medicine, which is, when the treatment isn't working, question the diagnosis. So the treatment of like, I'm working harder, was not working for me, because I was still burning out. I was still depressed. I wouldn't say I was depressed, but I was still like pretty miserable. And so I started to question the diagnosis and started to think, there's got to be another way here. And this was when I sort of started stumbling my way into this idea of like, feeling good makes you more productive. If you find ways to make things fun, that actually completely changes your life and changes your energy levels. And that was the sort of rabbit hole of research I started going into for myself, because I didn't want to live a life where I'd be watching the clock at work and getting home completely freaking drained of energy, and then sort of trying to use discipline and grind to make another YouTube video. I'm like, what the hell is the point of that? I wanted to have a life where I was working towards the goals that I wanted to, while also enjoying the process along the way. And that was where I started discovering all this research into positivity and the power of positive emotions and stuff. And then started using myself as a human guinea pig to apply those concepts. Started making videos about them. People started to resonate with them. And I was like, oh, there's something here. So when Penguin approached me being like, hey, do you want to write a book about productivity? One of the core questions was, what is the one thing? Like, if you had to boil it down to just one thing that has been the secret to your own personal success, what has that been? And it was like, oh, it's easy. I find a way to make things fun. I was like, great, that's a book.
Interesting.
And so the research process is all about kind of making sure that thesis works, that it's backed up, figuring out like, what does organizational psychology say? What does positive psychology say about this? What does the neuroscience say about dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, all these hormones? How does that interface with this idea? And turns out it is true. Positive emotions lead to success. And a Harvard professor by the name of Sean Acker has actually written a book in a similar vein called The Happiness Advantage. which is more about happiness and less about work. But his whole thesis, as he has realized through decades of research at Harvard, is that it is not that success leads to happiness. It's that people who are happy are more successful. Happiness comes first, success comes later. So if you can find a way to feel good about the things that you're doing, you're gonna succeed way more in life. But also you'll just feel better about everything, which is partly the point of being here.
Tell me about that Christmas day, because I feel like that was an inflection point. When I was trying to think of like when, if you were to sort of point out one day of like burnout,
Yeah.
would it be that day?
Yeah. So Christmas Day, this was 2018. This was 4 months into my full-time job as a doctor. I was on call on Christmas, and I got there, and Christmas Day, like the staffing levels are short. There's a bit of festive cheer in the air, but there was a lot of stuff going on. And I remember, like, I got in, kind of made my to-do list of all the paperwork, and one of the nurses said to me, "Hey, this patient needs a manual evacuation." And I was like, "Wait a minute, manual evac? Isn't that where you put your finger into their bum and scoop out their poo?" And she was like, "Yeah, exactly that." And I was like, "I've never done that before." And she was like, "Well, I haven't either, but you're the doctor, so you got to do it." And then one of the other nurses was like, "Oh yeah, I'm from Italy. I'm a nurse from Italy. Nurses in Italy do that procedure." And I was like, "Great, can you do the manual evacuation?" And she was like, "No, I'm not. I'm not accredited to do it in the UK because nurses in the UK are not allowed to put their finger in a patient's bum and take out the poo." I was like, "Okay, fair enough." So she was like, "Don't worry about it. I'll coach you through the process." And so I'm there on Christmas Day, drowning in paperwork, and for the first time in my life, I'm having to do a manual evacuation, coached by this Italian nurse who's not allowed to do it because she's not accredited. And it's like, you know, I don't know if you've ever done that, but it's pretty grim. I couldn't really get the smell out of my nose for the rest of the day. It was like, you kind of feel like you want to gag, because if someone's at the point where they need a manual evacuation, everything, you tried everything else. You've tried giving them kind of laxatives from the top end. You've tried like softening the stool from the bottom end with a suppository and stuff. And all it needs is a doctor to come in there with multiple pairs of gloves and put a finger in the bum and take out the poo. So I did that. Patient was happy. Well, happy is a strong word, but like was at least their constipation had been relieved. And that to me was like oh my days. Like it's kind of funny looking back on it now, but my narrative in my mind at the time was, "Oh, I can't believe I'm having to do this. Like, there's too much work to do. There's not enough support around. I can't wait to get home so I can just like zonk out." And it was that kind of Christmas Day that was a bit of an inflection point of like, okay, I need to figure this out. I need to find a way to make work feel enjoyable so that I'm not watching the clock. And there's a really cool study method I came across in terms of like a method that people use to run scientific studies in sociology, which is, scientists will often try and figure out like, what is it that makes someone's life worth living? Like, how do you measure someone's happiness with their life? And one way of doing that is to give them like these little questionnaires to be like, how happy have you been in the last week? How joyful have you been in the last week? Blah, blah, blah. But another really cool way of doing that is to give them a little like notification on their phone or like a pager or something. And a few times a day, you ask them the question, you ask them, would you choose to fast forward to the end of whatever activity you're doing right now? So if you're driving, would you choose to fast forward to the driving so you get to your destination? If you're at work, would you choose to fast forward whatever you're doing to get to the end of it? Would you choose to fast forward to the end of the day of work? Would you choose to fast forward a podcast interview to get to the end of it because you don't enjoy doing it? And this gives you a really interesting measure of someone's life satisfaction, because what they find is that a lot of people would fast forward a lot of their lives.
Interesting.
A lot of people don't enjoy their jobs and they would choose to fast forward it just so they could get to the end of the day. And that was me. Like, actually, I kind of enjoyed working as a doctor. It's kind of fun. It's good. It's rewarding. It's good vibes. Team's nice. The nurses are cool. The doctors are cool. But if given the choice to press a button to fast forward to the end of the workday where I could go home, I would press that button almost every day of the week, with the exception of days where I was teaching medical students. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. I only came across this later, but now I run that question to myself through my mind quite a lot. It's like, would I choose to fast forward this thing that I'm doing? And if the answer to that is ever yes, it means that there is a problem. It's like what your wife says. If it's not fun, that's a concern. If it's not fun, we would choose to fast forward it. If it's not rewarding, we would choose to fast forward it. And that is a concern. I do not want to live a life where I would choose to fast forward most of it, because that means I would rather not experience it than experience it. What the hell am I doing then? It's like, let me take control of my own life. Let me find a way to make it fun. And so the next like year and a half of working in medicine was trying to apply this idea of like, okay, how do I actually find a way to make this fun? Yeah. So that I can get more energy at the end of the day to give to my YouTube channel and my friends and family and all that stuff. But it was that Christmas Day scooping poo out of a patient's bum that I still remember vividly as like, that
If
that
I
was a
was
cool
ever in
experience.
character,
Yeah.
you broke me out of character on that story. Man, I appreciate you sharing that. That prompt is so profound. And one thing I really liked about your book was that just the prompts that you have. And I think you said somewhere on your YouTube channel that like if you're reading a book and you see a good idea, you'll try to implement it right away. And I think this is a lot of that in your book. Like, hey, try it. If it works, great. If not, throw it out the window and move on to the next
Exactly.
experiment. And so I love that prompt.
Yeah. No, I think the idea of thinking in experiments is like super, super helpful. I don't know where I came across it, but I was like, as soon as I came across it, I was like, oh my God, this is the secret. Because, you know, I enjoy reading self-help books. I suspect you do as well. You know, I see on the bookshelf in the background. And, you know, people who read Forbes and listen to this podcast are probably high achievers who want to improve their lives. The problem is there's just so much life advice out there. And there's like so many different ways of living, so many different ways of doing stuff. And it can feel very overwhelming. But what I found super helpful is just approach all of this like it's an experiment. Like right now, I've just finished a 6-day Tony Robbins seminar here in Florida. And, you know, it's been going for like 14 hours a day for the last 6 days. And there's so many ideas that I'm getting in terms of like how to set goals and how to rewire limiting beliefs and things. And I've taken about 13 specific action points that I'm going to take away. And I'm going to just try these experiments. One of them is this thing he calls incantations, which is basically affirmations, but with more gusto. And I'm like, you know what? You know, initially I might be tempted to be like, affirmations, this sounds like bullshit. But, you know, this guy says that it's a good idea. And so I'm willing to try anything. Let's give it a go. Let me try out these incantations for a week or two and just see how it works. And I sort of treat myself as a human guinea pig in that sense. And then when I find an experiment that works, that's great because I can make a video about it. And that solidifies it in my own mind. And it's also really fun being able to share and teach stuff like that, to be like, hey, there's this really cool thing where if you just like say this phrases really loudly, you actually start to believe them because that's really cool. And here's how it works. And here's the science behind it. And then I'll do some digging, find the evidence, and then suggest it as an experiment that viewers or listeners can run.
That's amazing. I've been to one of his events, one of the like the two, or I think it's like 2 days long a while back. You know, what you just mentioned reminds me of self-talk. And you talk about it without saying self-talk a lot in the book. And I was just thinking about, there's a point where you said it took you until 2017, which I like seeing a video. I wouldn't even believe that it took you that long to make one because it looks like you've been working on this for such a long time in terms of posting. And you talk about overcoming fear.
Yeah.
And we're on this subject already. I'm just wondering, like, around that time, how did your self-talk change in 2017 for you to go from, I think nobody gives a shit or is going to give a shit to, you know what, I'm just going to do it.
Nice. Great question. So 2017 was when I started my YouTube channel. The self-talk actually changed in 2016. And the thing that changed it was a book. There's a book called Show Your Work by Austin Kleon, which is the second most life-changing book I've ever read after the 4-Hour Workweek. And it's a tiny book. It's the book I've gifted most often to most people. Show Your Work by Austin Kleon. It's incredible. It takes like literally 20 minutes to read because it's more like a picture book with like a few quotes and a few like, you know, collages and stuff. But Austin Kleon's point in Show Your Work is that basically in the modern era, it is not enough to simply do the work and expect people to know who you are or to show up for it or to give you a promotion and stuff. It's like a lot of us live life thinking that we are owed something, that like our boss owes us that promotion because can't they see how hard we've been working? And, you know, when people apply to jobs, they'll just send in a shitty resume or whatever with 5,000 other people and they'll hope to be picked. It's like Austin Kleon's whole point is like, no, man, take life into your own hands. The world we live in now requires you to be out there showing your work. You are showing your work by writing articles on Forbes, which anyone can read, by doing this podcast, which anyone can listen to. That is a process of showing your work. If you were to just do it in your own personal diary, no one would ever see it and you wouldn't be as successful as you are. Similarly, anyone listening to this, you know, this idea of building a personal brand, this idea of a professional reputation, essentially showing your work and putting your professional stuff out there on the internet is the ultimate secret to getting discovered, to getting ahead, to anything in life these days, at least in the career front. And so Austin Kleon's book really helped me realize, wait a minute, I'd been thinking about starting a personal blog for like 5 years at that point. I was like, you know, I read a lot of personal blogs. I really liked them. And I wanted to have my own. But, you know, a personal blog, gosh, who would have the audacity? How arrogant? How much of a total piece of shit do you have to have the audacity to have your own aliabdaal.com website domain name and to write things? Like, who the fuck is going to read the stuff that I write? It's like, that was my self-talk. It's like, who am I? Who am I to do this thing? And Austin Kleon's book made me realize, wait a minute, I'm just showing my work. If it's helpful for some people, great. If it's not helpful, that's totally fine as well. I'm not taking photographs of my Starbucks latte and posting it online. Like, that's not showing my work. That's just showing my coffee, unless I made the coffee. But I'm showing my work. I'm showing my sketches, my doodles. Hey, here's a screenshot of a website I've been working on. Hey, I've just edited my first video, and here are a few tips I took away from it. Here's how I made this look cinematic. And I started writing articles on my website, which are still active to this day, showing my work in that sense. And if I hadn't done that, I definitely would not have had the confidence a year later to think, you know what, I want to start a YouTube channel, because it takes a whole different level of confidence to put yourself out there on camera compared to on writing. So thank you, Austin Kleon. I'll be forever grateful in your debt for writing that amazing book.
I'll definitely have to check the book out. I haven't read Steal Like an Artist either. So maybe I'll add both of those to the cart at the same time. It's interesting. Like I was recently interviewing someone and he was great. But when we hit record, it was like he was clearing his throat and he had to get into a persona. And when I watch your videos, I just feel like you're the same guy. Like after you hit, stop. That's probably why I think partially why the videos sort of resonate is just like you're testing things out and you're just sharing them in full transparency.
Yeah, I think it's something I like. Often when people meet me, they'll say, "Oh, you're exactly the same in real life as you are on video," and I think that's really ideal, because it takes a lot of work to be someone that you're not. It takes a lot of work to put on a character or to put on a persona, and so like, over
so
time,
I'm gonna steal this from the book. It's not even in my questions, but you said somewhere along the lines when you do a training or teach a class that you put on your glasses. You and I both have LASIK. It's so like I don't need them, but I love that idea just because it almost makes you feel like you say, I think you have that Batman effect story, but it almost makes you feel, I don't know if it's more intelligent or whatever it is. I have some blue blocker glasses sometimes I wear, but I like that idea of like going into character.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a really really powerful strategy. The study it comes from, or rather, people have figured out over time, but there's a really cool study where they got a bunch of kids and they split them up into a bunch of different groups, and they asked them to do some sort of difficult task. And one of the groups they told to, just do it as you would. Another group they told to, like, I don't know, think positively or whatever. And the third group they told, imagine yourself as your favorite, like, cartoon character or movie character, like Dora the Explorer or Batman. And they found that the kids who pretended to be a different character performed better in the task, and they felt better about it, and they were more productive, if you want to use that word. And they called this the Batman effect, that when you think you are Batman, you actually perform at a higher level. And so this is, some people call it the alter ego effect. If you can step into an alter ego, Adele does this on stage. Beyonce used to do it on stage. Kobe Bryant used to step into his character. I think it was the Black Mamba used to be his character that he would step onto on stage. Like, a lot of people have realized that the mind is an incredibly powerful tool, and the mind is a survival machine. So what the mind does is that it holds us back from doing things because it doesn't want to take too many risks, since it's worried about like social disapproval and all this sort of stuff. But the mind is so powerful that actually, if you tell it that I am this character, it will start to act and behave as if you are that person. So for me, these glasses are completely fake, and I just wear them because I just wear them because, like, I don't wear them when I'm in normal life, but whenever I'm doing anything where I want to step into that character of like, I'm here, I'm trying to get out of my own head, trying to remove my own ego, and I'm purely here to serve someone else. I'm purely here to teach or to share what I know. That's when the glasses come on. I also recently got this necklace from this Tony Robbins event, which has like a Chinese character for passion in it. And I'm like, okay, again, this is an experiment. Nice. I've been wearing it for like 2 days, and I'm trying it out as to see, like, can I bring more passion to my workouts and to my kind of and to my work through wearing this necklace. So just
Love
a few,
that.
yeah.
Okay, so I have so many questions about your book, but maybe we can hit on a few of these if that's okay with you. So I want to be mindful of time, but I think there's like, I'd love to just sort of pivot to some of the key points. Would that work okay for you?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to skip some of these. What I would love to do is talk about the importance of the Japanese word shoshin. And I'm happy to jog your memory about some of this because being at a Tony Robbins event, I know how much sleep you actually get. Just not a lot.
Yeah, not a lot. So shoshin is a Japanese word which roughly translates to beginner's mind. This idea from, there's a bunch of different traditions, but there's a story of this Zen master, and this professor goes up to the Zen master and it's like, I want to learn from you. I want to learn from you. I want to learn from you. And the master says that you cannot fill someone's cup whose cup is already full, or words to that effect. And the idea is that this professor came in with all these preconceptions, all these ideas of like, I'm an expert in this thing and I want to get better. It's like, what the master is saying is, no, man, just empty the cup, treat yourself as a beginner, empty the mind, become a beginner again. And when you have that beginner's mind, you can then that's when you actually have the ability to learn. And I think a lot of us do this when it comes to things that we are already good at. Like, you know, I would consider myself a productivity expert, whatever that means. I've read a lot of self-development stuff and a lot of these studies and things. So going to a Tony Robbins event, I could approach it thinking, oh, this is all just like hypey bullshit. I already know this stuff. It's like whatever. But no, I'm going to approach it with Shin, with beginner's mind, that like, oh wow, I get to be at this thing. This is really cool. Let me see what I can learn, and let me just approach it as a complete beginner. I don't have any preconceptions, and obviously, the subconscious will start making connections of like, oh yeah, that thing that I read is sort of similar to that thing that he talks about, whatever. I'm trying to approach it as much as I can as a beginner. And when we do that in anything in life, whether it's our work or our relationships, it tends to make us more open to learning. And when we're learning and when we're making progress, that's one of the things that really drives intrinsic motivation, the motivation we feel when we actually want to do a thing rather than we're doing a thing for the sake of some sort of external reward. And so there is a lot of happiness and joy to be found in progress. And having a beginner's mind makes it so much easier to make progress, because you make loads of progress when you're a beginner, but you don't make very much progress when you're an expert. And that's just less fun. It's just more fun. It's just more fun to make progress. So you might as well approach things with a beginner's mind.
I love some of those stories that you told, because I feel like it's through those stories you can tell somebody, yeah, go into this meeting or into this conference and have a beginner's mindset, but it's so easy to not think that way. You had this quote that really I thought was profound. I'm going to have to write this one down, like on my desk somewhere. But you said, in the words of psychology professor Joseph Ferrari, to tell the chronic procrastinator to just do it would be like saying to a clinically depressed person, cheer up. And I know this is more about sort of that unblocking and getting clarity, but I'd love to hear that, how that quote resonates with you. That was one of my favorites in the book.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff around these days, like, people like Jocko and David Goggins and stuff, all of this like discipline narrative. This thing around like, you just got to do it, man. You just got to do it. Like the whole Nike thing of just do it. And there is some truth to that. Like there's some truth in all these things. Like clearly at some point you do in fact have to just do it. And actually at some point the depressed person does in fact just have to cheer up, but it's not particularly helpful, because if someone is depressed, they're stuck in thought patterns that make it very hard to cheer up. If someone is procrastinating or chronically procrastinating, they're stuck in some kind of thought pattern or emotional pattern that makes it really hard to just do it. And so instead of telling them to just do it, we want to try and understand what is going on beneath. And this is what a therapist would try and do. They're trying to understand, like, what are the emotions that you're feeling? What's the narrative that you're telling yourself about those emotions? And how is that contributing to what's holding you back? And usually when it comes to procrastination, which is mostly an emotional problem, fundamentally it is fear that is like the core of all procrastination. Either the fear of failure, or the fear of not being enough, or the fear of judgment. All of, like, basically those are the three big ones. I'm afraid I'm going to fail. I'm afraid I won't be enough, and I'm afraid other people will judge me. Mostly procrastination has one of those three things at its core. And so if we can understand that, we can understand what the emotion is, we can bring it out into the light. And usually when we bring these sorts of feelings out into the light, and especially when we write them down, we kind of see them for the stories that they are. Like, it's not actually facts. It's just a story that we tell ourselves about the facts. And so by doing that, and by doing things like this, alter ego, putting the glasses on, whatever, reminding yourself that, like, actually no one's really thinking about you and no one cares. Like, it's all good, man. Like, doing those things enough times ultimately does help rewire our thought processes, which helps cure procrastination, as it were. And then at some point you do in fact have to just do it. But I think just do it is where you end rather than where you start.
Yeah, it's such a blocker. Totally related to it. One of the things that I thought was super interesting too, and this is under sort of like the people aspect and sort of getting energy. You said, you talked about, so this is something I talk about with some of my friends. I had a friend who wanted to interview somebody, and he was afraid to ask someone for an introduction. And I said, just ask him to introduce you to her. People, like, I didn't have the story that you had to like back it up, but I said, trust me, like, it's going to help bridge, like, it's a favor that's going to strengthen your relationship with this person. And so when I saw that, I thought to myself, okay, there's someone that agrees with me here. And I'm curious, like, how can asking others for help actually strengthen or improve your relationships with that other person?
Yeah. That's great. So there's a really cool story from Benjamin Franklin's autobiography where he was running for like the Pennsylvania Senate at the time. And he had this rival who was like a bit of a dick to him. Like, they were like enemies. They were always disagreeing about issues. And Ben Franklin realized that he needed the help of this rival. He needed this rival to be on his side. Otherwise, he wouldn't get elected and he wouldn't be able to have the change they wanted to have. And so he was like, you know what? Let me ask him to borrow one of his books. And so he wrote to the guy and said, hey, I hear you've got this rare book in your collection, whatever it was. Would you mind if I borrow it? I'd love to learn from it. And the guy was like, oh, sure. Yeah, I'd love to give you my book. And that one interaction changed the course of their relationship. It turned this rival into a friend. And this has now become known as the Benjamin Franklin effect, which is that when we ask someone to do something for us, weirdly, it makes them like us more because it comes down to this thing of like the most powerful force in human personality is the need to stay consistent with your identity. If you have done someone a favor, if you've lent someone a book, you wouldn't do that to someone you don't like. You wouldn't do that to an enemy. So it's like to stay consistent with that, you would just change the way you feel about them, and that person becomes a friend. And so I think there's some nuance here. Like I think when it comes to asking for intros and stuff, it's important to be aware of like social capital and the cost of social capital, especially if you're trying to get an intro to someone who's like, higher status, as it were, and costs of social capital. But beyond
much context needed. Yes.
Yeah. Beyond that, mostly people enjoy doing favors for other people. Yeah. And I did a great interview with Professor Vanessa Bones, who's like an expert in the field of persuasion and like influence. And one of like a lot of her studies show that people are really, really, really bad at asking for favors. But if you ask most people, like, hey, if you were asked this favor, how would you feel? They'd feel like, yeah, it's totally fine. But like 90% of people wouldn't ask someone else because we think that other people think differently to us. Actually, other people think fairly similar to us around that front. And I think the way to think about it is think, how would you feel if you were asked that favor? And if the answer is, I'd feel pretty good, I'm great.
Yeah.
You know that the other person is probably also going to feel pretty good.
And I think that some of it is like how you ask, right? Like, is it a transactional relationship? And to your point, there's so much context to that. I thought one of the other, if you don't mind, I'm going to just like read this passage real quick.
Of course.
So this is about celebrating other people's wins. And you had this Swedish proverb that goes something like this. A shared joy is a double joy. A shared sorrow is a half sorrow. When one person shares good news with another, both people are happy. And when one person shares something sad with another, the act of sharing takes some of that sadness away. And my question to you is, why is it important to celebrate other people's wins, and how do we do that sincerely?
Yeah, this is a good one. So this is from the people chapter. Like, just for context for anyone who might be listening, the three kind of energizers that help anything that you're doing just feel better are play, power, and people. So 3 P's: play, power, and people. And so this is in the people chapter. We've got a bunch of different experiments that you can try to get more, to give more energy, and also to get more energy out of your interactions with other people. So because generally, we're social creatures, everything is more fun when you do it with friends or with coworkers or whatever. And so it's like, what are the specific practical strategies that we can use to get energy out of these kind of interactions? Because we've all had that experience of like, there are some people we hang out with who we feel totally drained by, and we leave feeling drained. But there are other people we hang out with where we feel energized and stuff. And one of the things that makes people be energizers rather than drainers is the way they celebrate good news. So for example, if I were to go up to a friend and I would be like, hey, Joe, like really great news. I just did this fantastic interview. This guy was sick. We had a great podcast with great vibes. Now he has an option of how he responds there. I've done my bit of like sharing the good news. Now, if he were an energizing person, which he is, he would say, wow, that's fantastic. What did you guys talk about? Like, I want to hear more about it. That would be really cool. And then it would be an energizing interaction. If he were like, cool, that would be a pretty draining interaction. If he were like, oh man, let me tell you about my day. It's so shit. It's blah, 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 blah. That would be a draining interaction. It's just about recognizing like, if we can, we can't control the actions of others, obviously, but we can control the way we respond to other people. And, in the book, I call it cheerleader Charlie, someone who responds in a active and constructive way, like actively responding with energy, but building upon the news that someone else has shared. That, oh my goodness, it's so great that you've done that interview. Like, how was it? Tell me more. That makes both parties feel more energized, which means that if you're trying to optimize your productivity, which is kind of what the book is about, but also not really about, if you're trying to optimize your productivity, that gives you more energy, but also it leads to a happier and more fulfilled life.
I thought that was amazing. There's just certain things that you kind of go through life on autopilot, and just thinking about that. And the next time I receive like sad news or good news, and how I can react, I feel like is so important. And I appreciate you adapting. I know my questions are literally going from like the front of your book to the back of your book here. So
It's all good.
okay, I'm going to try to be mindful of time here. I did want to talk about, so you have this sort of unblocking chapter. Part of that is seeking clarity. The experiment I thought was really profound was this crystal ball method. And there's this quote from General Eisenhower that you have that, again, I will probably have on a post-it note on my desk. And it goes, "No battle was ever won according to plan, but no battle was ever won without one." And I'm just curious if you can explain the crystal ball method and how you use it in your own life.
Yeah. Oh, mate, crystal ball method. This is something I literally do every day. This is my favorite question to ask people if they're having a bit of a struggle. The crystal ball method is basically like we all make plans for these things that we want to do. Oh yeah, like I'm totally gonna start working out 3 times a week or whatever it is. I actually made that commitment to my fitness coach like 3 days ago. My goal for 2024 is to get into the best shape of my life. And so I'm gonna do 3 workouts a week. And that's very easy to say and very difficult to action. But in that moment, you can use the crystal ball method, which is to project yourself forward and ask, let's imagine it's a week from now and we are talking. And I have not, in fact, worked out 3 times a week. What are the top 3 reasons why I did not work out 3 times a week last week? And that gets you thinking, okay, what are the top 3 reasons? Well, I'm traveling right now, so I didn't have time, or rather I didn't make the time, because it's never that we don't have time. It's always we choose to not make the time. Okay, I chose to not make the time. Number 2, I didn't work out because I didn't feel like it when I did have time. Number 3, I didn't work out because the hotel that I was at in LA didn't have an easily accessible gym. Okay, let's figure out how do we mitigate against all these 3. So number 1, I didn't have the time. Is it in the calendar? Let's just put it in the calendar right now. Good. Number 2, I don't feel like it. That one is a bit harder, but that's like recognizing that when the time comes around, I may not feel like it, but that's okay because I can just do it for 5 minutes. And I'm going to rock up, do it for 5 minutes, do 1 set, and at that point I can relax. And the third one, I guess I could just search in Google Maps to see where's the nearest gym. Oh, there's a gym there. Okay, cool. Oh, I'm in the middle of nowhere and there's no gym. Could I do a body weight workout instead? Cool, fantastic. This YouTube video, all right, cool, done. And within like 30 seconds, we have just identified the top 3 blockers that are going to stop me from working out 3 times next week, and we've just done something about them. And that's amazing. And no one does this. Like people are like,
what a great
make
prompt.
all these plans.
I love it. Yeah.
People make all these plans, and then we're like, yeah, of course I'm going to do that because like, rah, you feel motivated in the moment. But it's when you project yourself into the future and imagine what went wrong that you start seeing the obstacles, and you realize generally these obstacles are very surmountable. There's so much stuff we can do to avoid these obstacles. And often it's just about prompting ourselves in the right way. One specific way that I don't think this is in the book, but one thing that I find really helpful is to just have the same, like I have a template on my journaling app, which is I call it the AM5, which is sort of a riff on 5 a.m. like AM5, 5 minutes in the AM. First thing I do is I open up this journal, and it's just a template that autofills. And this template asks, what's today's adventure going to be, which is like, what's my most important task? How do I do it in a way that's fun? That's in the play chapter. But I also use that as a bit of a habit stack tool to add other useful questions for depending on what habits I'm trying to build. So actually my journal at the moment, because I'm trying to build the habit of working out, it asks me 3 questions. It asks, what is the diet plan for today? Which makes me think, oh yeah, what am I planning to eat today? How do I make sure I get enough protein? Which is a question I just never ask myself. But now the fact that my template is telling me asking me in the morning makes me think, oh yeah, I guess I could go to CVS pharmacy, get a protein shake, and that will get me for 40 grams and all this kind of stuff because I'm trying to build muscle. The second question is, what is the exercise plan for today? And the third question is it in the calendar?
Yeah.
And every time I go through those questions, I'm like, yeah, diet plan for today, exercise. Yeah, I think I'll get my 10,000 steps in at like 4 p.m. in between calls. Is it in the calendar? I'm like, shit. Good point. Let me put it in the calendar. And I love that as a way of sending messages to my future self, knowing that like in a moment of clarity, I realized that my future self is going to be busy, and I just need to prompt myself with the right prompts. And if I prompt myself with the right prompts, then that makes the behavior I'm trying to do so much easier and so much more fun.
I've always struggled with like to-do lists, and I saw your video of this thing.
Nice. Yeah.
And man, if it's out of sight, it's out of mind for me. And I've kind of taken a long time to learn that. That's amazing. Two quick questions for you, and we can spend a lot of time on this, but I'm just curious. This is one of my favorite prompts. Is this sort of wheel of life experiment, and I'm going to do it myself. And basically, you map out sort of is it like 10 or 12 different aspects of your life, your health, your relationships, money, like spiritual things, and you essentially just rate it like 1 to 4 on a bar graph. I love that fact that you can sort of color it in, and it gives you a little more clarity. I'm just wondering, from the wheel of life experiment, what was sort of the blind spot for you that helped with this prompt and experiment?
Yeah. So the wheel of life, you split your life into multiple components. If anyone's listening to this, you can just Google the phrase wheel of life on images, and people have different ways of doing this. You can just pick whichever one works for you. You just kind of rate your life on a scale of 0 to 10 on like each of these different components. And for me, what I have realized recently, because I do this every few weeks, just as a bit of a sort of just making sure that like the path that I'm on is actually the path I want to be on, because it's so easy to veer off course, and then life gets in the way, and then we forget to think holistically about our life. Recently, I realized that physical health had taken a downturn because I'm in the middle of like traveling the world as a digital nomad, and all my stuff's in a suitcase and stuff. And that means I'm not in a routine of working out, which is why I was like, oh, physical health for me was a 4 out of 10 in terms of how happy I am with that area of my life. Cool. Let's do something about it. Let's make a plan. Let's talk to my fitness coach, all that kind of stuff. The other area that is a little bit low for me is in the friends category. Because again, through traveling and stuff, like I've lost touch with some of my friends, and I'm really bad at replying to WhatsApps. And so one of the goals that I set for next year, for 2024, is I'm going to organize a friends holiday every quarter. So every quarter, I'm just going to organize a trip, book an Airbnb, people can come, whatever. And that I know will be a great way for me to reconnect with the people who are maybe back in the UK, or maybe some of my cousins in Pakistan or whatever, try and bring people together for these sorts of things. So the nice thing about the wheel of life is not about the fact that you're rating your life. It's about the fact that you're rating your life, and then you're figuring out, okay, interesting. I'm unbalanced in that particular area. Yeah. Let me do something about it. Because like if you do a prompt or whatever, and it doesn't lead to an action, it's kind of pointless. And so I'm always about like, what is the action I've therefore taken as a result of reading this thing, or as a result of doing this journaling prompt. So I find that to be super helpful.
I love that. Last question for you. So you have the deep dive podcast that you've done. Out of all the interviews, which one thus far has been most life-changing and impactful for you?
Ooh, what a good question. About 100 interviews. I'm trying to think back.
Like which one? Maybe there's something you've actually implemented. Maybe it's the way you think about something. Which one do you feel so far has maybe changed your life the most?
There are 2 interviews I did with a chap called Daniel Priestley, who's an amazing entrepreneur. You should definitely interview him. He's sick. You'd love him. He is really cool. Those episodes have also done super well. Like Dan Priestley is not famous. Like no one really knows who he is outside of like the sphere of like entrepreneurs. But each of those episodes has got like over 1 million views, and he keeps on getting like messages from people being like, I listened to you on Ali's podcast and it was incredible. And what he taught me was just a very step-by-step framework way to think about building a business. Because previously, even though I'd been making money on the internet and like whatever, I didn't have a framework for like, what is a business? Like, what even, like, how do you even make money? Like, how does that work? But the framework that he taught me in that video, that are now in the podcast for anyone to see on YouTube or on Spotify or whatever, are just so game changing, where like the comments in those videos are like, oh my fucking God, I never knew this stuff existed in my life. Like, how is this possible? It's so cool. And because, I spend 8 to 12 hours a day on work, and my work is my business, like there's so many principles we've genuinely implemented from Dan Priestley's advice from those podcasts into our business to help our business grow. And yeah, it's just been so good. So I would highly recommend that episode for people.
That's amazing. I love it. We can have a separate whole conversation just about your creative process. Before this, I texted Jay Klaus. You've been on, I think you've been on his podcast. He messaged me. I didn't know, because that's what he does, right? He decodes the creative process, and he's the best at that, and I'm not. And so I said, hey, have you interviewed Ali? I definitely want to listen to that as well. So that'll be next on my list, man. It was great meeting you. I appreciate you just leaning into this and your openness. I felt it, and I'm looking forward to hoping to just spread the message about your work and your book. And I always say it's my job not to screw it up from here. So appreciate all the,
thank you so much.
All the insights.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And then thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, of course. Safe travels.
Take care, man.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.